Good morning. SEC Insider Hit brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. It's good to be blue, the official healthcare provider of the Out of Bounds Show. Last week we had Brad Edwards on, College Game Day on ESPN Radio, and we really hammered, a little bit of Texas and Southern Cal. And from there, we got into dual threat QBs, ones that played for Blue Bloods and won it, ones that didn't, like Michael Vick, but was a great player. And so I want to continue to piggyback off some of that because of where we are today in the world of college football and even the NFL. And so we welcome in ESPN insider Brad Edwards on the Coors Light guest line. And so, Brad, last week I asked you, and we kind of danced around, and I was like, man, Vince Young was almost underrated, as good as he was at the college level. And then I said, hey, in their prime, at their best, who would you take? Vince Young, Tim Tebow, Cam Newton. And you didn't hesitate with Cam. So after that, so let me start with this. Is Cam the best? If I throw these guys on the board, Vic, Vince Young, Tebow, Cam, Manziel, Deshaun Watson. Cam's your number one guy on the board at the collegiate level, right?
Yeah. I mean, for me, he is. I mean, as far as one season, because that's all we got to see him for was one season. So if you asked about a career, I'd maybe go with Deshaun. Now, I don't know if I think of Deshaun Watson as a dual threat quarterback. I mean, he obviously could run, made some big plays with his legs in some big games, but I don't really look at him as a dual threat the way I do, most of those other guys you mentioned, because it wasn't a big part of their offensive game plan. Like Auburn in 2010, without Cam running, I mean, their offense was significantly limited. I mean, Clemson could have destroyed you without Deshaun Watson ever taking off and running. And now, obviously, like against the better opponents, there were times when he needed to. But that wasn't. And it's kind of, I would say something similar for Trevor Lawrence last year's Clemson team. Even Joe Burrow with LSU. Burrow could hurt you running the ball from time to time, but that obviously wasn't, that wasn't plan A or even plan B or plan C, but it was still dangerous. So, yeah, that's why I would put Cam in a different category. And, I might even he didn't come up in our conversation last week, but you just mentioned him. I might even put Manziel number 2. If you just want one season, who was the best, I might even put Manziel's 2012 over Vince Young in 05 or Vic in 99. I had forgotten about Manziel when we were talking a week ago, but he was just unbelievable that season, especially after you got through the first month or so, and he really started to figure it out. I mean, understanding, and this would have to be said for Vic too. The first month of the season was his first month of playing college football, so there certainly was a learning curve there. But once he figured it out, man, no one could stop that guy.
I keep leaving guys out. We're visiting with Brad Edwards, who's basically like a historian, also College Game Day on ESPN Radio, and we just got hammered from a listener. Bo, if you're going to include all those guys, Vic, Vince Young, Tebow, Cam, Manziel, Deshaun, you have to throw in Lamar Jackson.
Oh yeah.
So, and that's a great point.
I think I'd still put Manziel's 2012 ahead of Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson was awesome from the start of the season all the way through the first 2 months, and then people started to figure out their offense. If you look at the last few games they played, he was really held in check pretty well. You could argue that his offensive line wasn't great, and that most of what they did was just him individually, and I wouldn't try to dispute that. But when they played some better defensive fronts down the stretch, he wasn't good enough by himself, to just make it happen, to will it to happen. And so that would be my reason for putting Manziel's 2012 over Lamar Jackson in, which year was that? 2016 or 17? His first main year as a starter, the year that he won the Heisman. I'm guessing that was
16.
16. Yeah, 16.
Because somehow Mississippi State beat Louisville in the Gator Bowl with a bunch of assistant coaches and GAs. They beat Lamar Jackson and Petrino, which is still mind-boggling to me. But anyway.
Like I said, Mississippi State was just better up front on defense than Louisville was up front on offense. And the same thing was true, when Louisville played Houston with Ed Oliver in November of that year. He just destroyed them. And so I think it was a credit to him. I mean, not just what a great season he had from a statistical standpoint, but the fact that he did it without a great offensive line, which really wasn't evident until the very end. But, man, that Clemson game, what he did against Clemson was, middle of that season and what ended up being a very pivotal game for the whole national championship race. He did everything but win the game.
As we look back in this dual threat, but on a whole nother level explosion where these guys can sling it too, which is what we discussed with you last week. And you do make a great point on Deshaun and some of these other guys that didn't have to run the football and could beat you. Manziel too, I think, but could hurt you on the ground. Tebow is so revered down here, Brad.
Yeah.
Yet, if I start picking individual seasons, he's not with the guys that we're going over. He's not 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, he was a great player, and he played a long time, and he started 3 years. But it's interesting now that we have more to go on, and now that it's been several years since he played. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what it was with Tebow is how unique his skill set was at the time that he came along. He looked in some ways like a fullback playing quarterback. And so that was what was different, is that he wasn't just a running quarterback, but he was a power runner at quarterback. He was Florida's short yardage back. I mean, that was one of those where if they got in 3rd and short, 4th and short that season, you knew what the play was. I mean, the ball was coming to Tebow, and he was running straight ahead. And that was the play, and they just dared you to stop it. And so that was what was different with him. And he ended up doing something statistically that had never been done before, which was a big reason he won the Heisman, which was that he was the first player, at least in at the major college level, the FBS level, to have 20 rushing touchdowns and 20 passing touchdowns in the same season. And so I think that really spoke to his skill set and, what he did that nobody before him had really done. And that was why he got so much hype. But if you go back and look at it, the season that he won the Heisman, the season in which he put up the biggest numbers, Florida lost, I think it was 4 games that year. I know they ended up losing to Michigan in the bowl game.
They went 9-4.
But I think, and so I think that's part of it too. Like a lot of these other guys, you look back on that season, and these quarterbacks either carried their team to a national championship or came really close to it. Tebow's team was not really in the mix. And if I remember correctly, that was the team that got trounced by Georgia when Georgia did the dancing in the end zone after the touchdown, and that was in some ways was the high point of the Mark Richt era when they obliterated Florida that day. But I believe that was during Tebow's Heisman winning season. And so there definitely were some low points from the team perspective. And I think that's one of the reasons that, that season doesn't stack up with some of the others, is because as great as he was, he didn't carry his team to great heights. But he was so great throughout his career that we just kind of blended all together. But no question, he was a great quarterback and he should be remembered as such, but I just don't know that he has one season. Look, if he had the numbers that he had in 2007 in the 2008 season, while leading that team to victory, then I would probably remember it a little bit differently. But he just, he had a really good individual season in between a pair of national championship seasons. The first one, he wasn't the starter, obviously, but the second one he was. And just a lot of great moments. And the 2009 team that didn't win the title was a really, really good team also. So it was a lot to get excited about, but it just was spread out over the course of 4 years.
Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio, on the Out of Bounds show and the Coors Light guest line. Did you have an opportunity to see Cam play live in college?
Yeah, national championship game.
Oregon.
Against Oregon, which was clearly not one of his better games. And that a lot of people were expecting that to be a shootout. Those were two, really good offenses and two teams that were, Oregon was okay on defense. Auburn, I think, was best you could say was average on defense that year. And I don't know if it was the month layoff, more than a month layoff that we used to always get, with the BCS championship games with both teams. A lot of those games, and I was just talking about Tebow. I remember that Tebow game against Oklahoma and Sam Bradford. Those were two really explosive offensive teams as well. And that game, along with that Auburn-Oregon game, both ended up being low scoring, much lower scoring than you would have thought, given the offensive firepower. And so that happens sometimes. But yeah, the one time I got to see him play, it wasn't a whole lot to talk about that Cam did in that game. Obviously, the play that everyone remembers from Auburn's offense was that run that Michael Dyer had that set up the game-winning field goal, where it looked like he was down, but he wasn't, and everybody stopped, and then they started back and all that. But it was maybe his worst game of the season, but obviously the most important result.
Brad Edwards on the Out of Bounds show, talking QBs, college quarterbacks. So it's really amazing what's happened since Vince Young. I mean, you can count Vic, but then we went through this little time where we didn't really have that big of a name. And then you go through Vince Young, Tebow, Cam, Manziel, Deshaun / Lamar Jackson.
Yeah,
isn't that an incredible run, right?
Yeah, RG3 too.
That's right.
It's easy to forget about him because he flamed out so quickly in the NFL. But yeah, he was, it would be a great discussion, and I think you'd have to talk to a lot of people in order to really get to the bottom of it. Who was the best athlete out of all those guys? And RG3 was just like an elite track athlete, like as a hurdler. When I say elite, he's not on the same level as, like there have been a few guys over the years, like Anthony Schwartz at Auburn right now, and can't remember if it was Jeff Demps or Chris Rainey. One of them at Florida was like a world-class sprinter. He wasn't at that level, but he was like a 300-meter hurdler or something like that. Like he was a really good in track, in addition to, being a very good football player. And he was one of those who kind of carried Baylor, was a one-man offense all the way up until that last season when they really took off. So yeah, RG3 definitely belongs on that list of dual threat college quarterbacks when that became a thing where you combine the up tempo with the dual threat QB, and it was just unstoppable for a good decade.
Did you get to see Michael Vick live in college?
I did. Yep, same thing, national championship game, and that was. I've had this question come up a number of times. Who's the most impressive player you've ever seen in person? Now, I'm distinguishing that, of course, from most impressive season, which I've already given you the answer to. But of all the players that I've been able to watch from field level, there was no one that came close to wowing me like Michael Vick did in that game. That was against Florida State, and they lost in that Sugar Bowl. We know what Florida State's teams were like in the 90s, and just the athletes that they had all over the field, and especially at defensive end for a good stage there. And man, there were several plays in that game where guys just came off the edge, and he looked like a sitting duck right there in the pocket. And his combination of quickness and speed, just to be able to escape trouble and not just avoid a negative play, but to get out and make a positive play. It was another one of those where it was a one-man show, but given the talent of the team that he was pretty much doing it alone against, made it even more amazing. And they ran out of gas in the fourth quarter, and Florida State ended up winning a game. I think the final score was deceptive. It was a much better game than what it looks like when you look at it in the history book now. But yeah, that was the most impressive individual performance. And I got to see Lamar Jackson in person once or twice. I know once, his last year at Louisville, they were at home against Clemson, and got to see him from field level, and he's impressive, but he was, at least the one game I saw him. And of course, I mean, look, Clemson's going to stop you from doing a lot of stuff, but Florida State did too in the 90s. And what Michael Vick did in that one game, I have not seen anyone individually compare to that.
Okay, what about throwing the football in the 2000s? As far as being at a game, and I mean, I think Tua is one of the best to spin it, but there's I don't even know if you had an opportunity to see Luck spin it live at Stanford.
I did. Yeah,
okay.
I did. I saw Andrew Luck, and how many times did I see him? I think I saw him 3 times. I saw him at least twice against Oregon. I saw him, I think in his sophomore year at Oregon, and then his junior year, they played Oregon at home. So I was at both of those games, and then I also saw him at USC in a multiple overtime game that I can't even remember if they won or lost. It's one of those just kind of blends in with a bunch of. I think Stanford won in multiple overtimes. I remember someone fumbled into the end zone in overtime and ended up losing the game. But yeah, so I saw Luck play at least 3 times in person, and there's not a single one of those games that I really remember. I know the Oregon game, the last time I saw him play was not one of his better games, but there's nothing memorable in those games. And I'm trying to think of anything that really was. I mean, I did see Tua against Joe Burrow in Baton Rouge, 2018. Mm-hmm. Which obviously was not a great season for Burrow, and that was a terrible game. And then even Tua, that was that up to that point, no one had been able to slow him down, and LSU did a fairly good job against him that night. And so, not a memorable game there either. I'm trying to think who would be. I can't remember being at a game where a quarterback just completely lit it up, and then in the process was completing, NFL type throws to guys, and you're just like, man, okay, how do you fit into that window? I mean, I got to tell you, one of the most impressive ones I can remember seeing was, two. Let me get two of the most impressive ones. Deshaun Watson in the championship game against Alabama that they lost.
Yes.
Yes. He was amazing in that game. And then there was another one from what was the other one I had in my head? Go on, because I just blanked. But it was another quarterback that lost, and it was like for the first 3 quarters he was on. Oh, it was Jake Fromm. Jake Fromm in the SEC championship game against Alabama a couple years ago. First 3 quarters, very rarely have I seen a guy as on target as he was in that game. And then when they really needed it in the fourth quarter, he wasn't able to complete them anymore.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to Manziel 2012. I got to see him play for the first time live against Mississippi State. He scored 28 points in like 4 minutes, Brad, to start the game. And I'd never seen anything. I mean, I was on the field the night Cam went in there and won on a Thursday night.
The Thursday night, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember. I was in Alabama watching that game. We were in Tuscaloosa, or we're going to be in Tuscaloosa because Alabama played Penn State 2 days later, and we were staying in Birmingham, and we were out at a sports bar watching the game. So there are obviously a lot of Auburn fans, and that was the first time most of us ever saw Cam, and that was an amazing performance too.
And so Manziel in 2012, I'd never seen anything like that, Brad. Not live. I mean, and I got to see more. You know, the 2 Ole Miss games that he was in were incredible because those were actually close. MSU couldn't do anything against him, but the way Freeze's team was set up. Did you get to see Manziel?
Yeah, I got to see him twice. Both of his games against Alabama.
Okay,
I was there in Tuscaloosa when they beat them, and I was there in College Station the following year when he put up even bigger numbers in a loss, which was also amazing. But the thing with Manziel is that like some of the plays that he made, they were just so freelanced that it was. I don't know that there were ever any points with Manziel where he just got in a rhythm throwing the ball, and you're like, man, you can't stop this guy today. Like he's just in the zone. He did complete some passes that were just really well thrown, but it was always surrounded by just a lot of ad lib, run left, run back to the right, whatever, and just like nobody could catch him. And so it was really more that than it was just anything that had to do with passing skill. So he's just kind of in a rare category, with his ability to do what he did. With his legs more than his arm, but obviously he could throw too. He wasn't one of those guys where, look, if you're defending him, you wanted to keep him in the pocket and make him throw, but
Sure.
especially with him having Mike Evans, and he had a few other guys too. He had good receivers, and there wasn't a good way to defend him, but I think you were better off with him throwing the ball.
Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio. Hey, bud, we appreciate. We're going to continue to bother you and do these college football podcasts. They're fun.
Is good.
And
also, let me give you a heads up. Tomorrow, I believe it is, we are releasing the second version of FPI. We do this every April, which has all the game predictions and all that stuff. So it'll give you some good fodder. We can talk about that.
Oh, good. Love it. All right, ESPN.com tomorrow. Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio. Thanks, Brad. See you, bud.
Okay, see you, Bo.
Live in the Bank Plus studio, the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone, brought to you by Farm Bureau Insurance and favorites.com. Bundle your auto and home and save with your local Farm Bureau Insurance agent covering all 82 counties in the state of Mississippi. The show is powered by Farm Bureau Insurance, also driven by your next John Deere tractor or John Deere lawnmower at Mississippi Ag, powered by agup.com, and their new location in Canton on the west side of I-55. Don't forget about our podcast on Apple Podcasts. Search Out of Bounds Show.